Hi, Libra. Wow. Right away, I can tell this reading is carrying a very different energy. Something is changing here. Not in a loud or dramatic way. More like a quiet realization that has been growing behind the scenes for a while. And honestly, I don't think this person expected to feel this way again. For a long time, they may have convinced themselves that they were fine, that they had moved on, that they could keep their distance and stay focused on everything else. But something isn't sitting the same anymore, because the more they try to ignore what they feel, the harder it becomes to pretend it isn't there. Okay, what I'm picking up is someone who keeps finding themselves thinking about you when they least expect it. Little reminders, little memories, little moments that seem insignificant until suddenly you're on their mind again. And the interesting thing is, I don't feel like this is coming from pressure. I don't feel like this is from chasing. I feel like it's coming from clarity. Because while they've been looking at everything around them, they've slowly started realizing what has been missing. And for many of you, Libra, that realization may have a lot more to do with you than they are ready to admit. So let's see what's unfolding here. There is something about this energy that feels different, Libra. Not louder, not more dramatic, just more honest. Because as I look at these cards, I don't feel like someone is fighting their feelings anymore. I feel like someone is getting tired of fighting themselves. And wow, that is a very different thing. For a while, this person may have believed they could simply move forward without looking back. They may have convinced themselves that distance would make everything easier. That time would quiet whatever this connection stirred inside them. That eventually they would stop wondering, stop remembering, stop feeling. But that's not what happened. Something has been growing in the silence. Something has been waiting beneath the surface. And the first card that catches my attention is the Judgment card. The moment this card appears, I get the feeling of someone waking up to something they can no longer ignore. Not because anyone forced them to, not because anyone demanded answers, but because the truth keeps finding its way back to them. You know, sometimes people spend months trying to explain away what their heart already knows. They search for reasons. They search for distractions. They search for anything that might make things feel simpler. But eventually there comes a moment when the noise starts fading, and all that's left is honesty. That is exactly what this feels like. This feels like someone standing face to face with a truth they have avoided for a very long time. And that truth has your energy written all over it. Because sitting right beside that Judgment card is the Ace of Cups. And honestly, I don't see somebody trying to run anymore. I see someone becoming softer, someone becoming more open. Someone who is finally allowing themselves to feel emotions they kept locked away. For some of you, this person spent a long time pretending they were fine, pretending they didn't care as much as they did, pretending they had everything figured out. But late at night, during quiet moments, during those random pauses in the middle of everyday life, your presence keeps finding them, not necessarily your physical presence, your energy, your memory, the feeling of you. And they are starting to realize that what they feel isn't temporary. It isn't something that disappeared simply because time passed. The connection is still there. The emotions are still there. And maybe that realization is surprising them more than anyone else. Okay, let's talk about the Justice card. Because the moment I saw it, I couldn't stop thinking about balance. Not the kind people talk about on the outside. I'm talking about inner balance. The kind that happens when someone finally stops arguing with themselves. Because for so long, this person may have been caught between what they felt and what they thought they should feel, between what their heart wanted and what their fears kept telling them. But that struggle is starting to lose its power. The excuses don't feel as convincing anymore. The walls don't feel as necessary anymore. The distance doesn't feel as protective anymore. And that's important. Because once somebody starts seeing things clearly, it becomes harder to return to confusion. It becomes harder to pretend they don't care. It becomes harder to keep telling themselves stories that no longer fit. What I keep hearing is this: maybe I've been resisting something that was never the problem. And wow, that realization alone can change everything. Because the energy around Libra feels peaceful here, not perfect, not fantasy, not obsession, peaceful, and that matters. Because there is a difference between excitement and peace, a difference between intensity and peace, a difference between temporary attraction and peace. This person may have experienced many connections in their life, different people, different situations, different possibilities. But something about this connection keeps bringing them back to a feeling of balance they struggle to find elsewhere. And then we arrive at the Eight of Cups. What fascinates me here is that I don't feel this card pulling them away from you. I actually feel it pulling them away from everything that has been keeping them disconnected from themselves. Old assumptions, old fears, old emotional baggage, old narratives. The things that once convinced them to stay distant are beginning to lose their grip. And honestly, I think that's why this reading feels so powerful, because nothing here feels forced. Nobody is chasing. Nobody is convincing. Nobody is trying to control the outcome. The change is happening from within. This person is beginning to see things differently because they genuinely want to. And when change comes from that place, it tends to last. The more they sit with their thoughts, the more they understand what this connection has meant to them. The more they understand why your energy still lingers. The more they understand why moving on never felt quite as simple as they expected. Because somewhere along the way, Libra, you became associated with something they weren't finding anywhere else. A feeling of calm, a feeling of truth, a feeling of emotional balance. And whether they are fully ready to admit that yet or not, the cards are showing me that realization is becoming harder and harder to ignore. Something is waking up here. Something is becoming clear. And I don't think this person is seeing this connection the same way they once did. Because the strange thing is, people often don't understand the value of something while it's still within reach. They understand it later. After enough silence. After enough distance. After enough moments where they reach for something familiar and realize it isn't there anymore. And honestly, that's the feeling surrounding this person right now. The moment the Five of Pentacles appears, I don't see somebody focused on material things or outside circumstances. I see somebody becoming aware of an absence. A space that wasn't always noticeable before. A space that has gradually become impossible to ignore. You know, there are certain people who leave an imprint on your life without even trying. Not because they were the loudest. Not because they demanded attention, but because of how they made you feel. And Libra, I keep feeling like that's what this person is wrestling with. They're beginning to realize that your presence brought something into their world that felt comforting, safe, easy, natural. The kind of energy that doesn't ask for anything and yet somehow makes everything feel lighter. And now that there has been distance, they can feel exactly where that energy used to exist. Wow, I just got the image of somebody scrolling through old messages. Not necessarily every one of you, of course, but the feeling is there. Revisiting memories, replaying conversations, thinking about little moments that seemed ordinary at the time. Because that's what the Six of Cups feels like here. Not dramatic memories, not perfect memories, just meaningful ones. The kind that sneak up on you when you're least expecting them. A certain phrase, a certain joke, a certain conversation. A moment where they felt understood. A moment where they felt accepted. A moment where they felt seen. And what makes these memories powerful isn't what happened. It's how they felt while it was happening. Because the truth is, being understood is rare. Much rarer than most people admit. There are many connections where people talk. Far fewer where people genuinely feel heard. And their sprint keeps returning to that realization. The feeling that with you, they didn't always have to explain themselves. They didn't always have to perform. They didn't always have to pretend. Something about your energy allowed them to lower their guard. And the more they reflect on that, the harder it becomes to dismiss its importance. The Queen of Cups is sitting here so quietly, almost like she doesn't need to prove anything. She simply exists. And that's exactly how this person remembers your energy. Not as somebody who tried to force their way into their life. Not as somebody who demanded validation, but as somebody whose kindness carried weight, whose emotional presence lingered long after conversations ended. Okay, I know that sounds simple, but it isn't, because people remember how they felt around someone, long after they forget specific details. And I think that's what is happening. The emotional memory remains, the feeling remains, the warmth remains, even when everything else becomes blurry. There's also regret here, not loud regret, not dramatic regret. The kind that grows slowly, the kind that arrives when somebody starts seeing the full picture. Because once they begin recognizing your value, they naturally start looking back at moments they took for granted. Moments they handled poorly. Moments they wish they had approached differently. And honestly, I don't feel like they can avoid those reflections anymore. The star keeps drawing my attention, not because it feels like fantasy. It actually feels surprisingly grounded. Almost as if this person has been moving through a period of emotional confusion and is finally finding something steady to focus on. And somehow, every road seems to lead back to thoughts of you, back to your energy, back to the connection, back to what they felt when you were part of their everyday life. I keep hearing this thought repeating in their mind. Why does it still matter this much? Because part of them genuinely expected these feelings to fade. They expected life to distract them. They expected time to do what time is supposed to do. Yet here they are, still thinking, still remembering, still wondering. And the more they sit with those emotions, the more one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The things they once prioritized don't seem nearly as important anymore. Certain worries feel smaller. Certain fears feel less convincing. Certain excuses don't carry the same weight they once did. Because when the heart starts speaking clearly, everything else begins rearranging itself around that truth. And what I find fascinating here is that nobody forced this realization. Nobody pushed it. Nobody argued them into it. Life simply created enough space for them to hear their own heart, and now they are hearing it more clearly than ever before. The silence has taught them things that noise never could. The distance has revealed things that closeness sometimes hides, and somewhere in that realization, they are beginning to understand exactly what has been missing. Not just who, but what. The feeling, the comfort, the emotional connection, the sense of peace they rarely find elsewhere. Something inside them is starting to recognize just how important that really is. And I don't think they've reached the end of that realization yet, because once somebody begins to understand what truly matters to their heart, something else starts happening. Their view of the future changes. Not overnight, not all at once, but little by little. And honestly, that's exactly where this energy seems to be moving. The first thing I noticed was how naturally the Ten of Cups appeared. Not with urgency, not with pressure, just quietly. Almost like a thought that keeps returning, no matter how many times they try to focus on something else. I don't think this person is only thinking about today anymore. I think they're beginning to wonder what life could actually look like further down the road. You know, there comes a point where attraction alone stops being enough. Excitement stops being enough. Temporary connections stop being enough. People start asking bigger questions. Who do I trust? Who do I feel safe with? Who do I actually want beside me when life isn't perfect? And wow, those are the kinds of questions I feel surrounding this person now. Because every time they imagine happiness, your energy somehow finds its way into the picture. Not because they're forcing it. Not because they're trying to create a fantasy. It just keeps happening naturally. The image keeps returning. The feeling keeps returning. The possibility keeps returning. And that's important, because this doesn't feel like wishful thinking. It feels like somebody becoming honest about what they truly want. The Empress is sitting here with such beautiful energy. And what stands out isn't romance. It's admiration. Deep admiration. The kind that develops when someone starts seeing another person as more than a moment in their life, more than chemistry, more than attraction, more than possibility. I feel like this person has been noticing qualities about you that carry weight. Your resilience, your calmness, your ability to keep moving forward, the way you continue growing even when life becomes difficult. Honestly, I think they respect you more than you realize. And respect creates a very different kind of feeling. Because attraction can come and go. Excitement can come and go. But respect? Respect tends to stay. The more they think about you, the more they realize they aren't just missing a connection. They're missing a person they genuinely admire, a person they see value in, a person they see substance in. And that's why the energy feels more mature than before. Okay, let's stay here for a second, because the Queen of Pentacles feels incredibly significant. Not because of what she says, but because of what she represents to this person's heart. When they look toward the future, I don't see them imagining chaos. I don't see them imagining uncertainty. I see them imagining stability, comfort, partnership, trust, the simple things that become more important as people grow older. A quiet evening together, shared goals, shared dreams. Someone who understands them after a difficult day. Someone who celebrates their victories. Someone who remains present through life's changes. And strangely enough, those thoughts keep leading back to you. For some of you, Libra, this person may not even be fully aware of how much their perspective has changed, because this feels less like a sudden realization and more like a gradual shift. A shift that has been happening beneath the surface for a while, like pieces slowly falling into place, like a puzzle becoming clearer, like someone finally seeing the full picture after staring at individual pieces for too long. The Two of Wands feels almost cinematic here. I keep seeing someone standing at a crossroads, looking outward, looking ahead, looking beyond where they are right now. And what fascinates me is that they aren't looking backward anymore. They're looking forward. That's a completely different energy. Because future-focused thoughts require hope. They require imagination. They require the willingness to believe something meaningful could still happen. And honestly, I think that willingness is growing. The fears haven't completely disappeared. The questions haven't completely disappeared. But they no longer seem powerful enough to block the vision forming in this person's mind. A future is beginning to take shape. Not in perfect detail. Not in a rigid plan, just a feeling, a direction, a possibility. The possibility of building something rather than simply remembering it. The possibility of creating new memories rather than replaying old ones. The possibility of sharing life rather than wondering what could have been. And the more I sit with these cards, the more I feel this person becoming emotionally invested in that possibility. Not because they have all the answers, not because everything is certain, but because their heart keeps moving in the same direction, towards something more meaningful, towards something more stable, towards something that feels real. And Libra, whether they've spoken these thoughts out loud or not, I don't think you're just appearing in their memories anymore. You're beginning to appear in their future. And that changes the entire landscape of what this connection could become. Because once somebody starts imagining you as part of the life they want to build, it becomes much harder to pretend you're just another chapter they can easily leave behind. Because the moment somebody begins imagining a future, another question naturally follows. What if I'm too late? And honestly, that question feels much louder than they want anyone to know. The energy shifts here, not away from hope, but into vulnerability. Because while part of them is allowing themselves to dream, another part is immediately pulling back, immediately questioning, immediately worrying. The Two of Swords feels incredibly present. Not because they don't care. Actually, it's the opposite. The more something matters, the harder it becomes to move with complete confidence. You know, people often assume indecision comes from a lack of feelings. But sometimes indecision comes from having too many feelings, too many possibilities, too many outcomes running through their mind at the same time. And that's exactly what I keep sensing. This person keeps standing between two competing realities. One reality says, go toward Libra. The other whispers, what if it doesn't go the way you hope? So they pause, they hesitate, they overthink. Not because their heart is uncertain, because their fears are loud. Wow, I can actually feel how exhausting that must be. Because every time they start building courage, doubt immediately appears beside it. Every time they begin imagining a conversation, another voice asks whether that conversation would even be welcomed. Every time they think about reaching out, they wonder whether too much time has already passed. And that's where the moon begins surrounding this reading. Not in a dramatic way, more like walking through fog. You can still see the road, you just can't see all of it. And that uncertainty makes everything feel heavier. This person doesn't have all the answers. They don't know exactly what you're thinking. They don't know exactly how you would respond. They don't know whether your feelings have changed, whether your boundaries have changed, whether your life has changed. And because they don't know, their imagination starts filling in the blanks. Honestly, that's where a lot of this struggle is coming from. Not facts, not reality, assumptions, questions, possibilities, stories they tell themselves when they don't have certainty. I keep hearing somebody replaying conversations in their head, looking for clues, looking for signs, trying to figure out what something meant, trying to determine whether a door is still open, trying to understand whether they still have a chance. And the more they search for certainty, the more elusive it seems to become. The Five of Swords feels connected to that internal battle. Because I don't feel like this person is fighting you. I feel like they're fighting themselves. One moment they're hopeful. The next moment they're discouraged. One moment they feel brave. The next moment they convince themselves not to risk anything. It's almost like they're carrying around two completely different versions of the future. One version ends with reconnection. The other ends with rejection. And because they care so deeply about the outcome, both possibilities feel real. Okay, let's be honest for a second. I think there is regret here, not overwhelming regret, but enough that it still follows them. Enough that certain memories make them uncomfortable. Enough that they occasionally wonder whether they handled things differently than they should have. Because the fear isn't only about being rejected. The fear is about discovering that an opportunity they once had is no longer available. That possibility weighs on them more than they would probably admit, especially when they are alone with their thoughts. Especially during those quiet moments where there are no distractions, no noise, no responsibilities, no way to avoid what they're feeling. And that's why the Strength card feels so powerful sitting here. Because this isn't the energy of somebody giving up. It's the energy of somebody trying to become stronger than their fears, trying to become stronger than old wounds, trying to become stronger than the voice that keeps telling them to stay silent. You know, real courage isn't the absence of fear. Real courage shows up when fear is still present. And I think that's exactly where this person is right now. The fear hasn't disappeared. The uncertainty hasn't disappeared. But something inside them is beginning to push back against those fears. A quiet voice saying, maybe this matters too much to keep running from. A quiet voice saying, maybe I owe it to myself to find out. A quiet voice saying, maybe fear shouldn't be making this decision for me. And honestly, that voice seems to be getting stronger. Not fast, not dramatically, just steadily. The kind of steady change that often happens before someone finally does something they have been thinking about for a very long time. Because while their heart is still carrying questions, it is also carrying something else. A growing desire to stop wondering and start knowing. And that desire feels stronger than it did before. Because eventually there comes a moment when feelings become too heavy to carry in silence. Not because they suddenly appeared, because they've been there for much longer than anyone realized. And honestly, that's exactly where this energy seems to be heading. The pressure is building, not dramatic pressure, not chaos, not urgency. Just a growing awareness that there are certain things this person can no longer keep locked inside. The Eight of Wands arrives with such a different feeling. The hesitation is still there. The questions are still there. But something else is moving now. Momentum. A desire to stop living entirely inside their own thoughts. A desire to stop imagining conversations and actually have one. You know, some people spend so much time rehearsing what they want to say that they never actually say it. But I don't think this person wants to stay in that place forever. I keep getting the feeling of someone reaching for their phone and putting it back, down, opening a message window, closing it, typing something, deleting it, thinking about reaching out, wondering if today is the day, wondering if tomorrow will feel easier, wondering how they would even begin. And wow, the fact that they keep returning to the thought tells me everything. Because if they truly wanted to let this connection go, they wouldn't keep revisiting it. They wouldn't keep imagining what that conversation might sound like. They wouldn't keep wondering whether you're thinking about them too. The Knight of Cups feels almost impossible to ignore here. There is something deeply sincere underneath everything I am seeing. Not perfect, not polished, not rehearsed, sincere. Like somebody who is finally becoming tired of hiding behind pride. Tired of pretending they don't care. Tired of carrying emotions that have nowhere to go. And honestly, I think they want you to know more than they've ever said. Not necessarily everything at once, not every feeling, not every thought, but more than before. Enough to let you see what's really happening inside them. Enough to let you understand that this connection mattered. Enough to let you know that the story wasn't as simple as it may have appeared. Because the truth is, people often reveal their deepest feelings long after they first experience them. And that's what this energy reminds me of. Someone slowly moving toward honesty. Someone slowly becoming brave enough to express something they've protected for a very long time. The Page of Pentacles feels surprisingly sweet, almost innocent, almost nervous. I don't see grand declarations. I don't see dramatic speeches. I see small beginnings, simple words, simple efforts, the kind that matter precisely because they are genuine. A message asking how you've been. A conversation that starts casually but carries much deeper emotions beneath the surface. A reason to reconnect. A reason to open a door that has been closed for too long. Okay, let's be honest. I think part of this person wishes they could skip straight to certainty. Skip straight to knowing everything will work out. Skip straight to hearing exactly what they hope to hear. But life rarely works that way. Connections rarely work that way. And deep down, I think they know that. So, rather than searching for guarantees, they are beginning to realize that they may simply need to take a step. One honest step. One sincere conversation. One opportunity to find out what is actually possible. Because wondering forever feels heavier than trying. And that realization is becoming difficult to ignore. The Chariot brings such powerfulness into the reading. Not because it feels reckless. It doesn't. It feels determined, focused, directed. Like somebody who has spent enough time sitting at the crossroads and is beginning to feel ready. To choose a direction. And the direction I keep seeing points toward connection. Toward communication. Toward movement. Toward finally bridging a distance that has existed for too long. Honestly, I don't think this person wants to keep carrying unanswered questions. I don't think they want another season of wondering what could happen if they simply reached out. The curiosity is becoming stronger. The desire is becoming stronger. The emotional pull is becoming stronger. And little by little, that pull is beginning to outweigh the fear. What fascinates me most is that this doesn't feel forced. It feels natural, like a river finally finding its course. Like emotions naturally moving toward expression. Like a heart naturally moving toward truth. Because when somebody keeps returning to the same person in their thoughts, keeps imagining the same conversation, keeps feeling the same pull despite time passing, eventually the desire to connect becomes impossible to completely silence. And I think that's where this story is heading. Not toward fantasy, not toward assumptions, toward a real moment, a real choice, a real opportunity to say something that has remained unspoken for far too long. And from what I'm seeing here, that possibility feels much closer than it once did. Because something feels different now, not just in the connection, in this person. And honestly, I think that's the most important shift of all. The energy surrounding the death card doesn't feel sad to me. It feels necessary. Somebody finally recognizing that certain versions of themselves can no longer come forward into the future. Certain habits, certain fears, certain reactions, certain patterns. The things that once kept them stuck no longer fit the person they are becoming. You know, growth has a strange way of forcing honesty. At some point, people stop blaming circumstances, stop blaming timing, stop blaming everyone around them, and they start asking themselves harder questions. What am I doing that keeps creating the same outcome? What part of this story belongs to me? What needs to change if I want something different? And wow, I feel like this person has been sitting with questions like that. Not because someone told them to, because life has brought them to that place naturally. Because when you truly care about something, you eventually become willing to examine yourself more honestly. And that's exactly what I see happening. The world feels almost beautiful here. Not because everything is perfect, because something is finally making sense. I keep getting the feeling of loose ends being tied together, old chapters finding closure, old lessons finally being understood, experiences that once felt confusing beginning to reveal their purpose. It's like this person is looking back over their journey and seeing it differently now. Not through the eyes of frustration, not through the eyes of regret, but through the eyes of understanding. Okay, let's talk about something interesting. I don't think they want to repeat old cycles anymore. I really don't. There is a maturity showing up here that wasn't present before. The kind that only develops after enough experience, after enough mistakes, after enough moments where somebody realizes they are tired of creating the same pain. Because what keeps coming through is a desire for something healthier, something steadier, something that can actually last. The fool appears and immediately changes the atmosphere. Not reckless, not impulsive, not careless. More like somebody standing at the edge of a brand new chapter and realizing they are finally ready to step into it. And honestly, I think that realization surprises them, because for a long time, they may have believed they weren't ready. They may have believed they needed more time, more answers, more certainty. But something inside them is beginning to feel differently. There is a growing sense of trust. Trust in themselves. Trust in what they have learned. Trust in the direction their heart keeps pointing them toward. And what fascinates me is that this energy feels much calmer than before. Less reactive, less fearful, less driven by emotion alone. The Four of Wands feels almost peaceful. Like somebody who has stopped searching for excitement and started searching for stability. Searching for something they can build. Something they can nurture. Something they can come home to emotionally. Because when I sit with this card, I don't see temporary energy. I see somebody imagining consistency, shared experiences, shared milestones, shared moments. The simple things that end up meaning the most. A relationship that feels safe. A connection that feels grounded. A future that feels real. And honestly, those thoughts seem far more important to them now than they once did. The Three of Pentacles keeps bringing me back to the idea of building. Not dreaming, not wishing, building. Because there is a huge difference. Dreams live in the imagination. Building requires action. Building requires effort. Building requires two people choosing to show up. And that's what this energy feels like. A growing awareness that meaningful connections aren't created through perfection. They're created through honesty, through communication, through consistency, through choosing each other again and again. I think this person is beginning to understand that, maybe more deeply than ever before. And because of that understanding, their vision of the future is changing. What they want is changing. The way they approach love is changing. The way they approach themselves is changing. Wow. That's actually the strongest thing I'm picking up. This isn't only about how they feel about Libra. This is about who they are becoming because of everything they've experienced. A wiser version, a calmer version, a more emotionally aware version. And that version of them seems much more interested in creating something genuine than repeating old patterns. The old chapter is closing quietly. Not with drama, not with conflict, just with understanding. And as that chapter closes, I can feel another one slowly beginning to open. A chapter that feels more honest, more stable, more intentional. A chapter that neither of you could have stepped into before becoming the people you are now. And from what I'm seeing here, that new chapter may already be closer than either of you realize. And honestly, what stands out to me most about this reading isn't just how this person feels. It's how much growth has happened beneath the surface. Because sometimes life doesn't change us through the moments we expect. Sometimes it changes us through the people we can't quite forget. The people who quietly leave a mark on our hearts and make us see ourselves differently. And maybe that's part of what this connection has been doing all along. Not just bringing two people together, but helping both of them become more honest with themselves along the way. So if there's one thing I would leave you with, Libra, it's this. You don't have to force what's meant to unfold. You don't have to carry every answer. You don't have to figure out the entire story today. Just keep honoring your own path. Keep choosing your peace. Keep choosing what feels true to your heart. And trust that clarity always arrives when the time is right. That's all I've got for you for this reading. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I truly appreciate every single one of you. If this message resonated with your situation, take what speaks to your heart and simply leave the rest behind. Wishing you peace, healing, and beautiful new beginnings ahead. And until next time, take good care of yourself. Bye for now.